Hey guys, welcome back to AAI Beyond. In this video, we will discuss a series titled Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power. This series consists of 8 episodes and is set thousands of years before the creation of the Rings of Power, specifically during the rise of the Dark Prince named Sauron, the fall of the island kingdom of Numenor, and the lives of men and elves. Okay, before we dive into the storyline, I want to remind you that this content contains full spoilers. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. Without further ado, let's jump right into the storyline. The series opens by showcasing the life of the elves. At that time, we see an elf named Galadriel releasing a paper boat she made. She successfully proves that her paper boat can navigate the swift river. Her friends, who witness this event, feel envious of her success, so they throw stones at the boat until it sinks. Galadriel becomes angry and is about to attack one of her friends, but her anger quickly dissipates when her brother, Fenrod, intervenes in the fight. Fenrod then advises Galadriel and teaches her to always do good. At that time, the elves lived in peace, believing that light would continue to shine upon them and that this happiness would last forever. However, all of that is abruptly shattered by the arrival of a dark prince named Morgoth. Morgoth snatches away the light of life from the elves, forcing them to go to war and leave their home, Valinor, for a distant and perilous place known as Middle-earth. After the Great War, the Dark Prince Morgoth was defeated. However, the elves also suffered significant losses, including Fenrod. Galadriel, who came to inspect the battlefield, had to face the bitter reality of her brother's death. She believed that many of Morgoth's forces still remained, now under the leadership of a new cruel villain named Sauron. She had vowed to kill Sauron with her own hands, but unfortunately, Sauron killed Fenrod first and left a mark on his body. Because of this, Galadriel took up her brother's vow and was determined to kill Sauron. From that moment on, Galadriel led the elf forces to follow Sauron's trail. However, the further they went, the fainter the footprints became. Although Sauron's evil and his forces began to be forgotten by many, it was not the case for Galadriel. No matter what happened, she remained resolute in her quest to find Sauron and kill him with her own hands. Upon arriving at a castle, Galadriel discovered a secret door. Behind that door, she and her squad found an engraving that was identical to the one on Fenrod's body. This further convinced Galadriel that Sauron was still alive. One of the elves tried to reassure Galadriel that Sauron might be dead, considering that the event had occurred centuries ago. In the midst of their discussion, the elf group was suddenly attacked by a giant troll. Galadriel, hearing the commotion, immediately rushed out and defeated the giant troll with her own hands. The attack from the giant troll was seen as the final peak of Galadriel's forces' struggle, and they felt that Galadriel had her own purpose beyond merely following the king's orders. On the other hand, we are shown 2 travelers passing through the region of Rovanion, the home of the Harfoot people. The 2 travelers express their fear because the area is known to be very dangerous. However, the perception of people is quite the opposite of reality. It is actually the Harfoot people who are afraid of the outside world. They camouflage themselves to hide their presence, and even when the seasons change, the Harfoot will migrate to find new places to live. At that moment, we see 2 children, Nori and Poppy, who are taking the kids outside their borders, playing joyfully while picking berries. Shortly after, Nori spots a wolf's footprint and realizes that they are being watched by the wild animal. Due to the situation, Nori and Poppy hurriedly took the children back to the settlement. After that, Nori met her mother, whose name was Marigold. Nori expressed to her mother how she had finally crossed the borders and seen the outside world. This, of course, was met with strong opposition from her mother, as she was well aware that the outside world was very cruel and dangerous. Additionally, the story shifts to showcase the elven stronghold city of Lindon. There is an elf politician named Elrond. Elrond received news that his friend, Galadriel, had returned. Galadriel's purpose in meeting Elrond was to be introduced to the Elf King in order to obtain new forces. However, Galadriel's request did not receive full support from Elrond, as he was one of those who believed that Sauron and his followers had truly been defeated. Shortly after, the High King named Gil-galad awarded Galadriel and her forces for their efforts in defeating Morgoth's followers. At that moment, the king announced that the war against Morgoth's forces had ended, and it was now time for the elves to enjoy a peaceful life. The king then granted Galadriel and her forces the honor of sailing to Valinor, a place where they would live an eternal and peaceful life. Unfortunately, this gift was not what Galadriel had hoped for. She intended to refuse the gift and continue her adventure to search for Sauron. There is an elf soldier named Arondir who is tasked with monitoring the area where humans live. He admits to feeling uncomfortable with the presence of the elves around them, but Arondir does not dwell on it too much as he does not want to cause a disturbance in the village. Arondir has fallen in love with a woman named Bronwyn, a single mother with one child who is known as a healer. The elf soldiers who are aware of this try to warn Arondir that love for a human will not end well. Shortly after, the elf soldiers receive information that the king has declared the war to be over, meaning that those stationed in the area are allowed to return to Lindon. All the elf soldiers are, of course, happy to hear this news, but not Arondir. After decades of guarding the area, Arondir has grown comfortable, but he cannot defy the king's orders. Before leaving, Arondir took a moment to say goodbye, while Bronwyn tried to hide her sadness. Shortly after, Bronwyn's son, Theo, informed his mother that someone was asking for help. An old man came with his cow and requested Bronwyn to treat it. After examining the cow, Arondir suspected that it had eaten something harmful, as evidenced by the milk being pitch black. This made Bronwyn and Arondir suspicious that the village of Horden was in danger. Meanwhile, in the farm, Theo suddenly found a sword with Sauron's mark on it. Upon arriving at the settlement, Bronwyn and Arondir were shocked to see that the gathering place had been destroyed. Before reaching Valinor, Galadriel chose to turn back and continue her search for Sauron. She jumped from her ship and decided not to join the other elf. Soon after, we see a meteor streaking across the sky and falling near the Harfoot settlement. Nori and Poppy, feeling curious, approach the site of the meteor's impact and discover an old man in the center. When Nori accidentally falls into the meteor crater, he does not feel any heat. He then moves closer to the old man and gently touches his face. Suddenly, the old man awakens and screams, causing a whirlwind to lift objects around him. As Nori tries to look into the old man's eyes, he gradually begins to calm down, and the situation improves. Feeling pity, Nori decides to take the old man with him. This crazy idea is, of course, opposed by Poppy, as they do not know who the old man is and he could potentially harm them. However, Nori tries to convince Poppy, and they agree to hide the old man for the time being. From his features, they can tell that the old man is neither human nor elf. So, who is he really? Back in the village of Horden, Arondir and Bronwyn were shocked to see that the area had been destroyed and that not a single person was left. At the site, they also discovered a mysterious tunnel that was suspected to be the cause of the devastation. Arondir then instructed Bronwyn to report the incident to their villagers so they could remain cautious, as per the king's orders. Meanwhile, Elrond went to meet Lord Celebrimbor, an elf master blacksmith. Lord Celebrimbor was setting up a new workshop to create stronger iron swords, but they were facing several challenges in realizing that dream. Therefore, Elrond suggested that they seek help from the dwarfs and visit an old friend of his, a dwarven prince named Durin. Unfortunately, Elrond's arrival was not well received by Durin, so to meet him, Elrond had to face a challenge. Elrond had to confront Durin in a stone-splitting contest. The two competitors would take turns splitting stones until one of them surrendered. If Elrond failed, he would be banished from all foreign lands. The next day, Nori went to check on the old man to bring him food, but the old man was no longer in his place. She searched the area and saw the old man writing something. When Nori tried to greet him, the old man erupted in anger again. Nori attempted to calm him down while reminding him that she was the girl who helped him the night before. Since they hadn't had the chance to introduce themselves the night before, Nori introduced herself to the old man. However, when asked to introduce himself, the old man could not remember anything about his identity. At the same time, Nori's father was helping the villagers erect a post that was too weak, but he ended up spraining himself, putting him at risk of not being able to migrate. Meanwhile, as she returned to Middle-earth, Galadriel discovered a raft with survivors from a shipwreck. Shortly after, they were attacked by a sea monster, and the only one who survived was a man named Halbrand from the Southlands. Galadriel, who was also thrown from the ship, quickly tried to swim away from the site of the attack. After that, Galadriel and Halbrand reunited, as they were the only two who survived the incident. At that moment, Halbrand revealed that he was fleeing from orcs that were attacking his village. From the necklace he wore, Elrond immediately realized that he was actually a king from the Southlands. Back to the fight between Elrond and Durin, as suspected, Elrond ultimately lost and had to accept the reality of being banished from the place. As Elrond was being escorted to the exit by Durin, he praised Durin's performance in leading his group. Elrond was captivated by the development of Durin's realm, which was very different from his last visit. Durin replied that everything had progressed because Elrond had not seen him for 20 years. This was the reason Durin felt upset with Elrond, even though they had once been close friends. As an elf, Elrond thought that 20 years was a very short time, while for Durin, it was a very long time. Durin was disappointed in Elrond for not being present at his wedding and the birth of his 2 children, and now Elrond casually came asking for help. This made Elrond feel very guilty towards Durin. He then apologized and, if permitted, wanted to apologize to Durin's wife and family as well. With an annoyed expression, Durin allowed Elrond to meet his wife, but only to apologize, nothing more. At Durin's home, his wife, Disa, was very happy to see Elrond. They had not seen each other for a long time, so Disa welcomed Elrond very warmly. Thanks to Disa's help, Durin began to soften towards Elrond and finally agreed to convey Elrond's intentions to his father. Back with Bronwyn, she warned the villagers about a possible attack on the town. However, the villagers did not believe Bronwyn's words because she had no evidence. At home, Theo heard a noise coming from beneath the floor, so he made a hole in the floor to see what was down there. To his surprise, a wide-open eye was staring at him, causing Theo to quickly hide in a cupboard. Bronwyn, arriving at the scene, saw that the house was in complete disarray. Theo, still hiding, urged his mother to find a place to hide. Shortly after, an orc emerged from the underground hole and immediately attacked Bronwyn and Theo. The two worked together and managed to behead the orc. Drowin then brought the head of the orc to show to the local villagers. This successfully instilled fear in the villagers, leading them to agree to leave the village. Before departing, Theo held the sword marked with Sauron's symbol. At that moment, the Sauron sword suddenly absorbed a bit of Theo's blood, and magically, the sword gradually began to regrow as it was before. Meanwhile, Arondir was exploring the hole in the town. While navigating the hole, Arondir was startled by the sound and shadow of an orc, and he tried to escape but was captured instead. That night, Nori and Poppy informed the old man that their group would soon be migrating. This meant that they would not be able to meet again. The old man then used fireflies to indicate that he was searching for a star constellation. Nori, of course, did not understand, but she knew where she could find information about the star constellations in the Harfoot kingdom. Durin informed his father about Elrond's intention to seek help. Durin's father was not entirely convinced of the elves, but Durin reassured him because he had known Elrond for a very long time. Because of this, Durin's father agreed to help Elrond. Back to Galadriel and Halbrand, the two of them were tossed about on the large waves, causing Galadriel to fall and sink. Halbrand, seeing this, tried to save Galadriel by cutting the rope that bound her. The next day, Galadriel and Halbrand were rescued by a ship helmed by someone named Elendil. The ship then took Galadriel and Halbrand to an island kingdom called Numenor, a kingdom located in the far west. The beauty of the place was stunning, prompting Halbrand to wonder who had created such a beautiful land. Galadriel replied that it was certainly not made by humans. Because in ancient times, humans were known to ally with evil, namely Morgoth, while the ancestors of Numenor had allied with the elves to combat evil. After the victory against Morgoth, the elves gifted this island as a reward. Thus, the relationship between the elves and the Númenóreans was very good until the Númenóreans suddenly changed and completely severed their ties with the elves. Upon arriving there, the two of them met Queen Miriel. Not wanting to linger on the island, Galadriel immediately sought the Queen's assistance by requesting a ship as transportation to return to Middle-earth. As the Queen did not respond, Galadriel once again brought up the past between the elves and Númenor, asserting that the elves had been of service to them. This statement greatly angered the Queen, as the Númenóreans had paid for the island with the blood of their ancestors. Halbrand then tried to ease the tension by saying that he was willing to wait for the Queen's decision regarding Galadriel's request. Because of this, the Queen agreed and instructed them to stay there for a while until she made her decision. Next, Queen Miriel asked a minister about Elendil's identity. The minister explained that Elendil was a captain from a noble family and was currently a coast guard along with his son, Isildur. A brief introduction about Isildur: he was undergoing training to become a ship captain. Queen Miriel then asked Elendil why he brought Galadriel into Numenor, knowing that the Númenóreans harbored a deep hatred for the elves. Elendil replied that it was all the sea's decision, and he believed the sea was always right. Queen Miriel then tasked Elendil with atoning for his mistake by giving him a sword. Unexpectedly, the tunnel discovered by Arondir turned out to lead to a gathering of orcs. There, he also encountered many villagers and captured elf soldiers. They were all chained and forced to work. It seemed that the orcs were deliberately digging the underground area of Horden to avoid detection while searching for something hidden there. While working, Arondir realized that the orcs were very afraid of sunlight. Based on this, Arondir and a few others decided to stage a rebellion when the sun was at its highest point. An orc who saw them gathering became suspicious and killed one of them. Back with Galadriel, she secretly visited the home of the Lord of Numenor with Elendil. Meanwhile, Halbrand, who was in the city, tried to apply as a blacksmith but was outright rejected because he was considered not on the same level as the Númenóreans, even though they were both from the race of men. This made Halbrand very angry, prompting him to steal an identification badge from a local resident. Unfortunately, the theft was discovered, and a group of locals came to swarm Halbrand. Not accepting such treatment, Halbrand retaliated against the people, resulting in his arrest and imprisonment. Upon arriving at the Hall of Lord, Galadriel discovered that the symbol of Sauron was actually a map of the Southlands, where Sauron intended to create a new world with dark power. In Harfoot, a leader named Sadok was seen training the children before they migrated. At that moment, Marigold was still feeling anxious because her husband's leg had not yet healed. Lurgan tried to reassure his wife, saying that they would be fine as long as their cart was at the front of the line. That night, Nori, assisted by Poppy, took a piece of Sadok's book about star constellations. The piece of the book was then placed in a bag so that Nori could read it later. Shortly after, the old man suddenly came and took the piece of the book, trying to read it near the campfire. Unfortunately, because he was too close to the fire, the piece of the book caught fire, causing a commotion. As a result of this incident, the identity of the old man was revealed to all the villagers. The villagers then turned against Nori for having smuggled a stranger into their group. Consequently, Nori and her family were punished by being placed at the back of the line during the migration. Back to Elendil, he went to see his two children, Isildur and Érin. There, he informed them that Galadriel was currently in the palace waiting for a ship to take her to Middle-earth, and it was likely that the captain assigned to escort her would be Isildur. Back in the palace, Galadriel met with Halbrand and revealed what she had discovered in the Hall of Lore. Galadriel recounted that many years ago, a man with a mark like Halbrand's necklace united the tribes in the Southlands, and now Galadriel was convinced that Halbrand was the next person who would unite them. Halbrand reminded Galadriel to be cautious, as his ancestors were loyal to Morgoth, and Halbrand was not the hero she was looking for. On the other hand, Queen Miriel met with her father, the king of Númenor, and informed him that an elf had arrived in Númenor. The next day, Migration Day finally arrived, and Nori's family struggled greatly to pull their cart at the back of the line. Shortly after, the old man came out to help Nori's family push the cart back to Arondir. According to their plan, they staged a rebellion during the day. He and his companions tried to cut the chains and pull the elves out of hiding. Unfortunately, due to being outnumbered, Arondir and his companions were defeated, especially since the orcs also unleashed their predatory animals to kill those who tried to resist. In the end, of all the people left, only Arondir remained. He was taken to meet the orc leader named Ardar. Is Ardar Sauron? Because it is said that Sauron has many aliases. In addition, the kingdom of Númenor was shown, where Queen Miriel dreamed of her kingdom's destruction, marked by the falling of white leaves and a tsunami. This made Queen Miriel worry about whether she had made the right decision. After that, Galadriel met with Queen Miriel to show her the scroll she obtained from the Hall of Lore, trying to convince the queen that Halbrand was the king of the Southlands who would unite them all. Galadriel believed that with the help of Númenor and the Southlands, they could surely defeat Sauron and save the people of the Southlands. Upon hearing this, Queen Miriel immediately rejected the idea, as she had to prioritize the welfare of her people, especially since she had just had a nightmare about the destruction of her kingdom. After hearing the queen's response, Galadriel did not give up. She requested permission to meet directly with the king of Númenor who had once allied with the Valar or the Elf. Queen Miriel was, of course, upset with Galadriel's request, as she felt that her decision was being undermined. As a result, Galadriel was thrown into prison aboard the ship. Isildur lost his concentration, causing him to mess up the training exam process. Because of this, the trainer ultimately expelled Isildur along with his two friends, Valandir and Ontimo. Naturally, Isildur's friends were angry because of Isildur's carelessness, which caused them to lose their dream of becoming sea guards. Back in the Southlands, Arondir was seen in front of Ardar, someone referred to as father by the orcs. After that, Ardar released Arondir to search for the fleeing villagers heading toward the tower. As he had no use for Arondir, he was after something much more important, the sword of Sauron that was currently in Theo's possession. Inside the tower, the Southland villagers hiding from the orcs began to face problems due to a lack of food supplies. At that moment, Theo suggested that he and his friend go out of the tower to search for food stocks in the nearest village. After gathering some food supplies, Theo entered a warehouse to collect more. At that moment, the sun was beginning to set, and Theo's friends decided to flee because they didn't want to be captured by the orcs. Shortly after, an orc came to attack Theo. In that situation, Theo drew the sword of Sauron and used his blood to activate the sword, which terrified the orc. As a result, the orc fled. The orc then announced the presence of the sword in Theo's hand, prompting the other orcs to come out. However, Theo managed to hide in a well. Back to Elrond, who was overseeing the construction with Lord Celebrimbor. Lord Celebrimbor expressed his suspicion of Durin because he accepted the agreement too easily, as if he were hiding something. Elrond then returned to the kingdom to confirm this suspicion, and sure enough, when he tried to interrogate the village, he immediately learned that the village and Durin had lied to him. Elrond then attempted to trace an old mine that Durin frequently visited. After entering a secret room, Elrond discovered something hidden. Shortly after, Durin suddenly arrived and accused Elrond of being an elf spy in his palace. Hearing this, Elrond tried to convince Durin that he came purely for their friendship and did not care about what Durin was hiding. Elrond's words made Durin believe, so he agreed to tell Elrond about his secret on the condition that Elrond would not tell anyone. Durin then opened a box and revealed a stone found by the village. Durin explained how valuable the stone was because it could be used as a weapon and currency. The stone was intended to be developed so that it could be used for the power and prosperity of his people. The stone, which Elrond believed to be mithril, was then given to him by Durin as a sign of their friendship. That night, Galadriel was freed by Parazon and his followers because she was to be returned to the realm of the elves. She immediately fought against all of Parazon's followers and infiltrated the tower. Galadriel then entered the king's chamber with the intention of stating her purpose. Unexpectedly, Queen Miriel was also there, as she was visiting her father. This was the reason why the king of Numenor had not shown himself for days. Queen Miriel had kept it a secret so that no one would know the state of the king. Queen Miriel then revealed the true reason why she could not ally with the elves. Since her leadership, she had actually wanted to make peace with the elves, but her decision was opposed by her people, leading to a massive rebellion and bloodshed. After that, Queen Miriel showed a prophetic orb known as the Palantir. It is said that whoever holds the orb can see the future. When holding the orb, Galadriel saw the destruction of Numenor, just as Queen Miriel had seen before. This compelled Queen Miriel to make a decision that was contrary to their Valar or the elves. Queen Miriel was well aware that her decision would impact the kingdom of Numenor. Hearing Queen Miriel's explanation, Galadriel tried to convince her to have faith in whatever decision she made. Unfortunately, Queen Miriel remained steadfast in her stance and refused to get involved again with the issues of the elves. Back to Theo, the darkening sky allowed the orcs to emerge from their hiding places. When the opportunity arose, he slowly climbed out of the well to quickly move to another location. Unfortunately, during this process, Theo was spotted by one of the orcs, but he was saved by Arondir. They ran through the forest and ultimately escaped from the orcs as the sun began to shine. Upon arriving at the tower, Arondir conveyed all the discussions to their leader to remind all the Southland inhabitants to surrender their homes and swear allegiance to him. A man named Waldrag approached Theo and inquired about the piece of the sword he had obtained. It turned out that Waldrag was the one who had previously kept that piece of the sword, so it was no surprise that he also bore the same scar as Theo. Back in Numenor, the day of return finally arrived. The orcs praised Queen Miriel's decision as it aligned with the wishes of her people. After Galadriel left Numenor, they planned to hold a feast to celebrate this with all the citizens. However, on their way to the palace, white leaves began to fall, as if to accompany Galadriel's departure. Queen Miriel believed that the falling white leaves were a sign of the Valar's disappointment with the decision she had made. Because of this, Queen Miriel quickly gathered all the council and her people. The queen announced that she would personally escort Galadriel on her journey to the Southlands. This action was taken because they also had a responsibility to save the human race that was now trapped there. Thanks to this decision, many citizens volunteered to become soldiers and accompany Queen Miriel. On the other hand, Ardar reported to the orcs that the construction of their tunnel was complete. Upon hearing this, Ardar immediately gathered the orcs and announced that the time for their attack had come. The Southland inhabitants inside the tower heard Browin's announcement about the orc forces that would attack them. He urged all the people to unite against the orcs and not to surrender their land so easily. Browin's announcement divided the community into two factions. Some were willing to become Ardar's followers because they did not want to die, while others supported Browin's decision. Back to the Harfoot people, after a long journey, they decided to rest in a certain place. While Nori and Poppy were searching for food, they were suddenly startled to see wolf tracks. They ran to report this to Malvar, but they were too late, as the wolves were already preparing to pounce on them. The three of them ran away from the wolves, but just as Nori was about to be attacked, the old man came to save him. The old man then unleashed his power, which frightened the wolves away. After using his power, the old man's hand suddenly changed in a strange way. Seeing this, Nori tried to make a remedy for him. However, when he was about to give the remedy to the old man, both the old man's hand and his own suddenly froze. This made Nori panic, and ultimately, after the old man finished reciting a spell, Nori's body was thrown back. The old man tried to calm Nori, but Nori was already too frightened, so he chose to flee back to Numina. There, he demonstrated his skills as an orc hunter and taught the soldiers not to rely solely on strength, but to focus on accuracy and speed at the same time. Meanwhile, Queen Miriel met with her father, and at that moment, the king of Numina suddenly opposed Queen Miriel's departure to the Southlands because he sensed a very strong darkness. In the realm of the elves, known as Linden, Durin was invited to dinner with the king and the elven leaders to celebrate their cooperation. The dinner that was supposed to be harmonious felt very tense due to the debate between Durin and King Gallard. After the dinner concluded, the king summoned Elrond for a private conversation. The king recounted the battle of the elves against Morgoth in the past, where a great lightning strike had struck the Tree of Life, resulting in a pure power that seeped from the roots of the tree into the depths of the mountain. The king suspected that Durin had obtained that object, so he asked Elrond whether his suspicion was correct. Elrond knew that the dwarfs had indeed acquired the object, but he could not inform the king because he had promised Durin. After that, the king invited Elrond to see the Tree of Life. They observed that the tree was indeed very old, putting the elven race at risk of extinction. That night, the son of the orcs named Keemen boarded the ship that was to be used for sailing to the Southlands. He and Isildur's sister, Erin, disagreed with the queen's decision to go to war, which is why he deliberately set the ship on fire to prevent the queen from leaving. Unexpectedly, on the ship, Keemen encountered Isildur, who was trying to thwart his plan. Unfortunately, it was too late, the ship had already caught fire, so Isildur quickly pulled Keemen out of the ship. Shortly after, a massive explosion occurred, but fortunately, Isildur managed to save Keemen's life. Meanwhile, those who agreed to follow Ardar left the Elven Tower and declared themselves as his followers. Inside the tower, Theo handed the sword of Sauron to Arondir. This was done because Theo feared that the sword was very dangerous, so it was better for Arondir to keep it. What the king had conveyed was then shared by Elrond with Durin, where he expressed that the elves desperately needed the mithril that Durin had discovered. Hearing this, Durin felt concerned and promised to help the elves, but he needed to convince his father first. In short, Queen Miriel's party, along with Halbrand, Elendil, and others, finally set off for the Southlands to prepare for an attack on the Tower of Caesar. There, the orcs were confused because the tower appeared deserted, but Ardar sensed Arondir's presence in the area. Unexpectedly, Arondir and the villagers had prepared everything very thoroughly. He deliberately lured the orcs into a trap that had been set up. Brolwyn and the villagers watching the event from a distance felt very satisfied. Now, they all moved back to the village to reclaim their land and power. The next day, Arondir attempted to destroy the sword of Sauron, but for some reason, all his efforts were in vain. Because of this, Arondir decided to hide the sword, while Leo was seen watching from a distance. After that, Brawl and Arondir led the villagers to prepare their next strategy. All the men would be prepared as archers, while the elderly and children would take shelter in the safety barracks. That night, Ardar's forces began to approach the village, and all the villagers who saw this took their positions, especially Brawl, who was at the front line. During this process, Brawl failed several times, but eventually, he succeeded in launching the first attack. The signal from Brawl was then used by Arondir and the others to launch the next assault. Like the previous night, Arondir, Brawl, and the villagers had prepared various attacks as a form of self-defense. Although the number of orcs was much greater, Arondir and the others felt overwhelmed for a moment, but in the end, they managed to defeat all the orcs. Due to their success, everyone felt very happy, but that happiness quickly vanished when they saw red blood flowing from the bodies of the orcs. Logically, if their opponents were orcs, their blood would be black. And sure enough, most of the forces that had just attacked them were humans who sided with Ardar. Shortly after, dozens of arrows rained down on the area, piercing the villagers one by one, including Brawl. Now, as Arondir and the villagers were caught up in their victory, Ardar and his forces launched their attack on them. Witnessing the situation, Arondir immediately instructed everyone to take shelter in the safety barracks. Inside, Arondir and Theo tried to save Broin's life by removing the arrows lodged in him. They then attempted to close Broin's wounds using hot embers. Although it was extremely painful, this action succeeded in saving Broin's life. Outside, Ardar and his forces were getting closer to the safety barracks, surrounding the villagers inside. Eventually, the safety barracks were breached, forcing Arondir to surrender the piece of the sword of Sauron to Ardar. As Arondir continued to resist, Ardar and his forces began to resort to violence. Seeing one villager after another being killed, Theo was ultimately forced to reveal where the piece of the sword was kept. After obtaining the piece of the sword, Ardar sensed the arrival of cavalry approaching the location. He quickly went out to give orders. Sure enough, Galadriel and the Númenórean forces finally arrived. With a very large number of troops, they gained the upper hand, leading to the capture of Ardar's forces. Seeing this, Ardar tried to escape, but he was immediately pursued by Galadriel and Halbrand. Fortunately, Halbrand took the opposite route, allowing him to intercept Ardar and stop his horse. Filled with anger, Halbrand intended to eliminate Ardar with his own hands, but he was stopped by Galadriel. Galadriel knew that Ardar was not the true Sauron, so she still needed him for interrogation. Galadriel mentioned that Ardar was referred to as Uruk, an elf who was transformed by Morgoth into the first orc. When Galadriel asked where Sauron was currently, Ardar replied that he had killed Sauron. He claimed to have done this because he felt the orcs did not need a leader, thus he referred to himself as their father, who would guide the orcs to secure their territory. Ardar's words, of course, could not be taken at face value by Galadriel, as she believed Sauron was still alive and was planning something somewhere. Thanks to their success, Queen Miriel and all the villagers held a celebration. During the celebration, Queen Miriel announced that Halbrand was the king of the Southlands. Upon hearing this, all the villagers cheered to welcome their new leader. After that, Arondir approached Theo and handed him a package containing a piece of Sauron's sword. He asked Theo to deliver the piece of the sword to the authorities so that it could be thrown into the ocean. However, when Theo opened the package, he was shocked to find that it did not contain a piece of the sword, but rather an axe. So, where is the sword now? The sword is currently in the hands of Waldrag. He went to the tower and drove the sword into place as instructed by Ardar. It turned out that the sword was the key used to unlock the dam's barrier. The water flowed rapidly through the tunnel created by the orcs towards the magma chamber of the volcano. As a result, the volcano erupted, spewing forth all the hot lava. The villagers panicked, trying to protect themselves, while the orcs took advantage of the situation to attack. The lava flow began to approach the settlement, but Galadriel seemed to freeze in place, standing to face the lava. After the volcanic eruption, the entire settlement was completely shrouded in black smoke, with flames everywhere. Galadriel, having regained consciousness, tried to find any survivors and eventually encountered Theo. Meanwhile, the other villagers, along with Queen Miriel, worked to rescue one person at a time who might still be alive. While Isildur was saving a villager, he became trapped inside a house that had collapsed and was buried under the debris. On the other side, the Harfoot tribe was seen passing through a place affected by the volcanic eruption. Sadok remarked that the eruption must have originated from the Southlands due to a new evil that had emerged. Suddenly, their attention was drawn to an old man who appeared to be communicating with a tree. For some reason, the tree seemed to respond to the old man's words, and suddenly a branch fell, nearly hitting Nori and a child. Fortunately, both Nori and the child were unharmed, but the Harfoot tribe members began to fear the old man. According to his words, Elrond was invited to meet the king to request assistance. Unfortunately, Elrond's request was denied because the mining of Mithril would cause a collapse in their kingdom. With a heavy heart, Durin apologized to Elrond for not being able to help in any way. As a result, Elrond bid farewell to Durin, as he needed to convey this message to the Elf King promptly. After Elrond left, Durin accidentally placed a mithril seed near the leaves of the Tree of Life, and sure enough, the leaves gradually returned to their original state thanks to that clue. Durin and Elrond then decided to secretly mine without the king's knowledge. With their collaboration, they successfully discovered a mithril vein beneath the mine. They were very happy, but that happiness quickly faded when their actions were discovered by the king. Elrond was then expelled from the kingdom, while the king expressed his disappointment in his son. The Númenórean forces, led by the queen, moved towards a refugee camp at the foot of the hill. At that moment, Elendil had to accept the bitter reality that his son, Isildur, had died under the rubble. Although his heart was shattered, as the head of the soldiers, Elendil could not show his sorrow in front of others. Furthermore, as a result of the incident, Queen Miriel lost her sight. Moments later, Sadok handed over a piece of his notes about the constellations and asked the old man to follow the instructions in the notes to find the constellation he was searching for. Since the old man knew that the villagers were afraid of him, he decided to go alone and bid farewell to Nori. The next day, the tree that the old man had touched suddenly flourished with an abundance of fruit. This made all the Harfoot villagers very happy as they harvested all the fruit available there. While Poppy was fetching water, she noticed a large footprint, which frightened her, and she quickly hid. The water basket was then discovered by 3 mysterious women. Poppy then recounted the incident to Nori, and the two of them agreed to investigate the 3 women. That night, they saw the 3 women holding the tree that had previously been touched by the old man. As they were about to leave, Nori emerged from his hiding place and said that the old man had left that place. Suddenly, the 3 women vanished and reappeared in front of him. Shortly after, the Harfoot villagers came out to rescue Nori, but the 3 women instead used magic to set their settlement on fire. As a result of this incident, Nori became worried about the old man's safety. He then asked his parents for permission to go and save the old man. Upon hearing this, Poppy offered to join, as did Malvar and Shadow. The next day, Galadriel and Theo finally arrived at the settlement with deep fear. Theo entered the treatment room to look for his mother, and fortunately, both his mother and Arondir were still safe from the previous incident. Not wanting to linger in the Southlands, Elendil informed Queen Miriel that their ship was ready to depart for Númenor. After Queen Miriel and her forces left, Galadriel also said goodbye to Brian and Arondir, as she needed to return to Lindon to report this matter to the King of the Elves. Following that, Galadriel, accompanied by Arondir, went to check on Halbrand's condition after the explosion yesterday. Halbrand was seriously injured, and seeing his state, Galadriel invited him to come to Lindon because there were medicines there that could heal his wounds. The next day, Galadriel and Halbrand finally set off for Lindon on horseback. Within the kingdom, the king cast the leaf of life to the ground, and it burned, revealing a fire monster nearby. Meanwhile, Adar and his followers celebrated their success in gaining control of the territory, and Adar renamed the region Mordor. In another location, the old man finally encountered the 3 mysterious women. Instead of attacking him, the women worshipped the old man and referred to him as Sauron. Meanwhile, Elrond was discussing a piece of mithril they had obtained with Lord Celebrimbor. With a heavy heart, Elrond conveyed that the elves could not assist them. Shortly after, Galadriel and Halbrand finally arrived at the Elf Kingdom, and the elves quickly took Halbrand to treat his wounds. Once healed, Halbrand met with Lord Celebrimbor to express his admiration as a blacksmith. There, Halbrand saw several gems collected by Lord Celebrimbor. Unfortunately, none of the gems were as strong as mithril. For this reason, the elves still needed a large quantity of mithril to create rings of super strength. Upon hearing this, Halbrand suggested that he mix mithril with some of the gems he had to achieve a similar level of power. In the kingdom of Númenor, Éowyn was asked to paint the face of the Númenórean king, Valandir, due to the king's deteriorating condition. At that moment, Valandir began to mumble, thinking that Éowyn was Queen Miriel, and he invited her to the place of the prophecy stone. Back in the Elven Kingdom, King Gil-galad was angry with Elrond and Galadriel for failing to obtain Mithril. Lord Celebrimbor tried to calm King Gil-galad by presenting his plan to combine Mithril with other gems. Initially, King Gil-galad rejected the idea, but Elrond managed to convince him. With that approval, they all finally began the creation of rings that combined stone mithril and gems. That night, the old man, accompanied by the three mysterious women, learned that he came from a land called Run. He was a dark lord capable of controlling fire, water, and wind. Since the old man had not yet mastered his powers, the three mysterious women were there to assist him. Unbeknownst to them, Nori and the others were already present, observing the old man and the three women. They saw two mysterious women binding the old man without any suspicion. Nori approached the old man and tried to free him from his bindings, but unbeknownst to him, the old man was actually one of the women in disguise. Just as Nori was about to be attacked, the real old man suddenly appeared to help him. A fierce battle ensued between them, with the old man unleashing his powers, but the three women managed to defeat him. As a result of this, Nori and the others found themselves in a very dangerous situation. Nori then tried to convince the old man to rise again and give him his staff. He assured the old man that he was not a bad person. With this reassurance, the old man finally rose and declared that he was not evil, which meant he was not Sauron. After that, the old man defeated the three mysterious women. However, as a result of the battle, Sadok sustained severe injuries and ultimately passed away after his last wish to see the sunrise was fulfilled by the old man. Elsewhere, Celebrimbor, Elrond, and Halbrand continued to face failures in uniting the Mithril. Galadriel, seeing this, urged them to take a break as they had been trying too hard. Galadriel's words prompted Halbrand to consider another plan, where they might need to slightly reduce the pressure on the Mithril. Soon after, Galadriel received information that Halbrand was not the king of the Southlands. Because of this, Galadriel immediately interrogated Halbrand and asked who he really was. Once exposed, Halbrand revealed that he and Galadriel shared the same goal, to defeat Ardar. He was a figure with many names, which meant he was the true Sauron. Halbrand's words made Galadriel extremely angry, causing her to be thrown into another dimension. There, she briefly met her brother and then encountered Halbrand while they were both above the sea. At that moment, Halbrand offered Galadriel the chance to be his queen, but of course, Galadriel was not deceived, as she could never unite with Sauron. Eventually, Galadriel became aware of her surroundings after being awakened by Elrond. Elrond asked what had really happened, but Galadriel chose to remain silent. Elrond then took Galadriel to another room to observe the ring-making process, which was nearly complete. There, Elrond inquired about Halbrand's whereabouts, but Galadriel replied that Halbrand had already left and would never return. Shortly after, the rings crafted by Celebrimbor were finally completed. Galadriel then reminded that the three rings were only to be used by the elves. Back with the Harfoots, after witnessing what happened to the old man, Nori intended to accompany him on his quest to find the land of Run. He asked for permission from his family, and for the first time, Nori's parents allowed him to go. The series concluded with a scene of Halbrand gazing at the dark world in the Southlands. Finally, the series Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power, has come to an end. Is Halbrand truly the real Sauron? And what about the identity of the old man? Perhaps all these questions will be answered in the second season of Lord of the Rings. So let's just wait, everyone. I hope you all understand the overall storyline of this series, and see you in the next storyline. Goodbye.